I'm Steve Ron, and I'd like to welcome everybody to Hague and to Candy tonight. We're awful glad to see everybody here. We've got a nice crowd, some people from out of town, some Hague residents, and we're looking forward to a good night. Just like to point out a few things. We've got 3 emergency exits here, plus the one you came in. The bathrooms are out in the hallway. We have water and pop over by the back window. If you get hot, please help yourself. And with that, I'd like to introduce Supervisor from the town of Hague, Edna Fraser. She'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence for our troops. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now a moment of silence, please, for our troops. Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce the candidates. And what we're going to do for the order of seating and the question order, I've got a basket that sort of makes me sure what you think. And we're going to have them draw it and they can take their place. I'll hold the basket in the middle, and it's Elise Stefanik, Matt Funiciello, and Matt Doheny. So you guys want to reach over, and we'll start 1, 2, and 3.
Hey, what did? Come on, in the middle, why not? Matt? Please.
All right.
Well, what do you got?
I'm still
2,
keeping
you're still in it, what do you got? Oh, nobody changes their seat. That worked out pretty well. Have a seat. Thank you. You got water here for you guys?
So it's Matt, and Elise?
Yes, yes. What I want to do is, basically, I'd like to acknowledge now a few elected officials that made the trek into our great town here. And if I could, I'd like to thank Matt Simpson, the Oregon Supervisor, for coming. The Supervisor of Ticonderoga. Thanks, Bill. We've got Mark Westcott, Queenberry Supervisor at Large, Mark. Oh, there you are, thanks, buddy. Evan Wood, the Thurman Supervisor. Supervisor. And another one of our town councilman, Ginger Kunzel. I'd like to go to the format right now. It's a pretty simple format, and we think it will make an informative night for you all. And it's a format that we think will keep the night moving quickly, with a lot of questions on the issues and a lot of good responses. We're going to start out with a 3-minute introduction by the candidate, and they're also going to have a 3-minute close. We're going to be asking questions, and Ann McDonald is going to be our moderator. She'll be asking the questions, and Janet Hanna will be the timer, and she's got a 30-second flag and a 10-second flag. Way to go, Janet. We're going to start with the first person will be Matt. He'll get the first question. You have 3 minutes to respond. Yeah, number 1. You're number 2. Remember, it wasn't that long ago. Then Matt will answer the same question, and he'll also have 3 minutes to respond. Then they'll go to Elise, the same question, and she'll have 3 minutes to respond. We're not going to have any rebuttal between the candidates because we'd like to hear how they respond to the issues. The next question will be directed to Matt in the middle, number 2, Elise, then it'll go back to Matt. The third question will go to Elise, Matt, and then Matt. So the sequence will stay throughout the night. So everybody has a fair shot of answering the question. Since they picked the order, that's how it's going to go. Some of you have written questions on the 3x5 cards that gave to Kathy in the back. Kathy, wherever you are, thank you. Make sure you cook me a good dinner tonight. I appreciate it coming up. She always does, you can tell. And then we're going to, if time allows, we'll ask those questions. And Ann will ask those questions. She has them up here at the front. We hope to have this within a 2-hour time frame. And again, if it gets hot in here, the fans are on, the doors are open. There's water and pop over on the side. And with that, let me turn it get started. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Steve. Hague has many claims to fame, but this congressional candidate forum is a first for the town. I think that says a great deal for Steve's organization. Just for clarification, I am a resident of the 21st Congressional District, and I am eligible to vote in the June 24th primary. The purpose of this forum is to inform voters of the candidates' positions on the issues through an orderly discussion of the issues. Two of the candidates are running in a primary, Matt Doheny and Elise Stefanik, June 24th Republican primary. Matt is running in the general election on the Green Party ticket. He has no primary opponent. Aaron Wolf, the Democratic candidate, was invited to attend the forum this evening. He declined since he felt that he did not have a primary opponent. Steve kind of gave you the organization. I hope I can follow it. The audience is asked to hold applause, noise, in order to give the speakers their full time. And we thank you for your cooperation. All right, so I hope you don't mind if I use your first names. And the first question.
How are we going to work that, Ann?
I guess that you're supposed to ask Steve that.
Man number one, come on to the podium, I am first. Come on down.
How come he gets
All right, so I guess we have Matt number one and Matt number two and Elise. Okay, thank you. The first question.
You can call me Matt.
Well, let's have a 3-minute introduction first.
So we're going to...
Yeah, then
Yes.
we'll do that, and we'll do the question, right?
Yes, please.
Matt, give us a
Just
3-minute
an
introduction.
introduction.
There you go.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ann. My name is Matt Doheny, and I'm running for Congress here in the great and vast 21st Congressional District. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Alexandria Bay on the other side of this district on the St. Lawrence River in the Thousand Islands. I went to school at Allegheny and Cornell, and over the past decade and a half, my career is focused on business. And what I focus on is rehabilitating, turning around, and saving troubled companies, small and large, all over the place. And so, why I'm running for Congress is a very simple idea. I want to make the North Country a better place. Very simple like that. And when I think about what's going on, and you see this day and time and time again, Washington is a fundamentally broken place. There's a reason that Washington has a single-digit approval rate. There's a reason that people have lost confidence and faith in our elected leaders. There's a reason that we have unemployment as high as we do, and we have terrible projection in terms of where we're going, in terms of economic growth and development. I've done something crazy over the past 2.5 months here in this 21st Congressional District. I've gone door to door. Over the past 63 days, every day, we've gone out and knocked on doors. Whether it's Rapid Point or Messina, down in Queensbury, Johnstown, and over to Loudoun, all over the district. And I'm here to tell you some unpleasant news. People have become depressed. They've sort of given up on Washington and Congress. People have said, you know what, I'll vote for you, but what good is it going to do? Secondly, people are nervous about our economic future. Time and time again, people said to me, that's great, but what do you do about jobs? How are my kids, my grandkids? I want to see my grandkids. When can my kids move back to the area and actually have jobs and productive lives? Look, that is what I've heard time and time again. And so when you think about what we need to fix Washington, we need two basic qualities. Look, someone who understands business, who understands how, whether it's balancing a corporate balance sheet or your own personal checkbook, whether it's understanding how to unlock people's potential and provide an economic opportunity right here on the ground. Doesn't matter if it's here in Hague or further up in Watertown or Messina or Malone. That's what we're talking about here. It's providing the opportunity set to live your life, no matter how old you are. Right out of school, retire, or anywhere in between. Right here. I have a background experience. That's what I have. I understand how challenging it is to create one job, and I understand how important it is to keep those jobs. Look, secondly, we need to have outsiders. People who are not marinated in the Washington system. We need people with fresh ideas. We need people who understand the value of hard work and who understand that Washington's not producing the results that we're looking for. I have those two qualities. Again, I've been working very, very hard. I've been in each and every one of the 194 towns, including right here in Hague. And I was proud to be here a little less than 2 years ago at the July 4th parade. It's a great place, and I look forward to having an interesting discussion with my two friends here, Elise and Matt. Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Matt Funiciello. I'm a bread baker from Glens Falls, New York. I'm a baker, but I also own a bakery and a cafe. I employ 30 people. I've been doing this for about 26 years. I was born in Wilton, New York, on a small subsistence farm. Wilton is still in the park until we gerrymander or redistrict again, trying to figure out what way to best manipulate pork moving into the area. But for the moment, it is still in the district. I was basically schooled in Ottawa, Ontario. My mother and father divorced, and I would spend my summers from the time I was 6 on my father's farm in Wilton, my school years in Ottawa, Ontario. So you could say I have been infected with some of the realities of the Canadian political and economic system, some of which many of you probably are aware are actually really good. Some of you are also aware that a lot of them are not perfect by any means either. But what I did in Ottawa was I read a lot, and what I did in Wilton was I worked a lot. And I brought both of those traits, those character traits, to my work as a bread baker, as an employer, as a father, as a hockey coach, although I admitted that Matt's a better hockey player than I am. I never played past middle school. I'm a terrible skater. But he doesn't have a good blocker, so he's a goalie.
See, he's already gone negative. You hear that?
I just want to keep things light, because to me, this isn't about politics, and the problem is it's always about politics, and we all hate politics. In this country, we have conditioned ourselves to believe that it's a bad word, that it's a boring word. The problem with that is then we're turning away from self-governance. We are deciding that all of the things that are wrong, that are coming down to us, that are trickling down from the federal and the state level, we're helpless to do anything about. And that's complete and total nonsense. We've taught ourselves that because we believe we have a two-party system and that you're not allowed to vote outside of it. And that's very unimaginative, and it's also not true. There are huge mechanisms in the way of third-party and independent candidates getting on the ballot in almost every state in the country. That's because there are Democrats and Republicans, and both of those parties have established the norm, which is I own this little fiefdom here and won't let any Greens or Libertarians on the ballot, and we own this one over here and we won't allow it either. I'm going to ask you tonight, as I talk to you about issues, to not be a Republican or Democrat, but just join me in being a worker, a denizen of the middle class, an American citizen, someone who values democracy and common sense. If you're open to hearing what I have to say, or even if you're not, I'm also going to welcome you to try some of the bread myself and my bakers made earlier today in South Glens Falls, New York, for free. We have a bunch of loaves. I'd love to have you all leave with a loaf of our bread. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I want to thank Ann and Steve for the opportunity to be here today, and I also want to thank Matt and Matt. I've enjoyed getting to know both of you on the campaign trail. My name is Elise Stefanik, and I'm proud to say I was born and raised in upstate New York, and I come from a small business family. When I was a kid, my parents risked every dollar they had to start our family's business, which is called Premium Plywood Products. It's a plywood distribution company. We sell to furniture manufacturers, cabinet makers, lumber companies. We work with one of the mills in Whitehall, New York. We're one of the biggest customers, and we're one of the reasons why they are in this part of New York State. I grew up working at the business, and I'm proud to work there today. We feel firsthand the economic challenges facing this part of New York State. Doing business in New York hasn't gotten easier. It's gotten harder with the tax burdens, the regulatory burdens, and the increased costs in healthcare. I'm proud to say that I was the first member of my immediate family to have the opportunity to graduate from college. I graduated from Harvard, and that's not the achievement. The achievement is graduating as a conservative and a Yankee fan, which is tough, especially when the Red Sox win the World Series. After graduating, White House. I worked for a year as a young woman on the Domestic Policy Council and in the Office of the Chief of Staff. Since then, I've worked in other capacities at think tanks, standing up for conservative principles, and I also worked for Congressman Paul Ryan, heading up his debate preparations. I believe I've seen firsthand that Washington is broken, and we desperately need a new generation of common sense conservative principles to right the direction of our country. Some of the focuses in policy areas that I've prioritized are: how do we create jobs and promote economic opportunity, especially for our young people in this part of New York State? The ways we can do that are cutting taxes and overhaul the tax code. The tax code no longer makes sense. It's over 85,000 pages long. It's an example of Washington gone wild. We need a flatter, fairer, and simpler tax system that helps average hardworking families and small businesses grow. 2, we need to reduce the regulatory burdens that are strangling our small businesses. We feel this firsthand in my family's small business. The increased red tape coming from the federal level and the state level is hampering our ability to do our job. 3, we need to repeal Obamacare and replace it with common sense healthcare solutions. The other focuses of my campaign are standing up for our constitutional liberties, especially our Second Amendment rights, fighting on behalf of our agricultural farmers in this district, who are the backbone of our communities, and standing up for our military veterans and our military servicemen and women. We need to ensure that when we look at the debt issues our country is facing, instead of trying to balance the budget on the backs of our soldiers, we're focusing on the real drivers of our debt. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you all for your applause, and I would ask you now, please no more applause until the end of the evening. Thank you. The first question is for Matt Doheny. John, come.
So Ann, we're gonna keep coming up to the podium?
I
Yeah,
guess.
would you please, that way,
We
absolutely.
just want to try to get you, we want you to get
It
you.
took 3 of us to get those mics set up like that.
Excellent.
All right, the first question for the 3 of you. What committee assignments would you request if elected, and why?
Well, certainly, as a freshman member, we won't be in control of our own destiny in terms of which committees we'll be on. But there are 2 groups of committees that I would hope to be considered for. One is something in terms of business, whether it's financial services, small business, or what have you, something where I can use my background in business, my skill in understanding how to go ahead and create jobs, how to go ahead and preserve jobs, and most importantly, how to get people back to work here in the 21st Congressional District. Secondly, if I'm able to be on a second committee, would be certainly armed services or some sort of veterans committee. Certainly I grew up and I live in the area right around Fort Drum, which is the largest employer in this district, and certainly in terms of the issues and the terrible issues that we've seen come before with our veterans care and the Veterans Affairs, the VA system, hopefully I will be on one committee that can actually have a positive impact and straighten things away here. So if I'm fortunate enough to be something business related, something military related, I think that would be the benefit for the district, and hopefully my skill set can land a hand for our district and for our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew? I'm never going to do that.
Well, here's the problem. If I get elected as a greenie, we all know that no one's going to want to play with me. So let's be honest. I can tell you all kinds of committees it would be in my best interest to be on, or it would be in your best interest for me to be on. They're probably going to lock my office door and not tell me where everybody else is meeting. Well, this is true. I mean, laugh. It's true. They know we don't want that guy anywhere near us. What I know is that I would like to have an impact primarily on agriculture within our district. That's the one issue that I think is probably most important. And the reason is that we all eat food. And we're all eating horrendous food. We've all been conditioned to eat horrendous food. One of the reasons why I am a bread baker is that it allows me to make a huge impact on a microeconomic level in supporting local and regional agriculture. I believe taking what is a very rich agricultural state and turning it from dairy farming, which is really, it's become a form of corporate welfare. And that's not fair to the people who are running those dairy farms. It's not fair to the animals who are living on them. It's not fair to the land that we continue monocrop, unsustainable agriculture. It's also not fair to us, because we all eat this food. We all drink that milk, and it isn't good for you. So what we need to do is support the advent of the farmers markets, all of the little regional, family, sustainable, organic farms that are growing up all over the place, that the FDA, the USDA, the Department of Health, the Department of Ag and Markets, with one hand, wishes to help, and with the other hand, wishes to shut down immediately, because you're fighting corporate agribusiness, and how dare you do that. We need to get some advocacy back into Congress for the small farmer. And many of us may not realize our connection to that small farmer, but for me, that's everything. Because again, as I say, it's the one thing that brings us all together. I can also say that there are many committees that work on tax reform. This is something I'm very much, as a member of the working class, interested in. I get up and go to work pretty much every day. I don't take vacations. I think I've had one real vacation in about the last 18 years. I don't have a cottage and a motorboat, and I'm not begrudging those of you who do, but I will tell you that my grandfather worked in a glove factory in Gloversville, and he had a cottage and a motorboat. And he and his wife had 2 cars. She didn't work. She worked at home. Our standard of living is going down the tube because of NAFTA and GATT. Tax reform has to happen. It has to happen at the federal level, where we have to understand constitutional documentation says we will not tax labor. We're doing it. We need to change taxation so it's simpler and that the working class is not carrying the burden for the super wealthy.
Thank you. Elise?
The committees that I would hope to serve on are the issues that I feel are facing the 21st district. One of those is the Ag Committee. We've heard, I think we're going to hear a lot of echoes here this evening. I've spent a lot of time visiting our local farms throughout the district, whether they're dairy farmers, whether they're organic farmers, whether they're specialty crop farmers, and we need someone to negotiate and roll up their sleeves and ensure that we have a 21st century farm bill policy. So I'm committed to serving on the Ag Committee. That will be one of my top priorities. I hope to join other representatives from this district who have also served on the Ag Committee that have gotten amendments added to the Farm Bill. Additionally, I think Armed Services would be a great fit for this district, given Fort Drum's presence in the district. I have a record of standing up against the across-the-board defense cuts that are being put into place as a result of the sequester. I believe we need a strong advocate to ensure that Fort Drum remains strong and grows in the 21st century. And the last committee that I think is actually very important, dealing with the economic issues that we face, is the Budget Committee. The biggest issue that I think my generation will inherit is the debt that this country has racked up. I think the lack of economic certainty that exists today is a result of this endless spending that's coming out of Washington. I believe it is in my generation's best interest to offer solutions to the problem, so I hope to have the opportunity to serve on the Budget Committee to focus on balancing the budget and reforming our entitlements programs so that they're there for future generations.
Thank you. The second question, what plans do you have to promote economic development in the Adirondacks? Matthew?
Oh boy, that's a good one for me to start with. I'm sure all of you are on my Facebook page, right? Hands? 2 people? I'm teasing. Essentially, there are a number of things we should be doing on economic development in the Adirondack Park, and we're not. And one of the main reasons why is that the only reason why we constantly are electing a Democrat or Republican to office in this congressional seat, quite frequently people who are spending all kinds of money from outside the district to get elected. It's called buying a seat, and it's being done with huge amounts of corporate and PAC money. That ensures that you and I don't get represented, because we didn't pay that money, they did. And they is what, when people say you're a Washington insider and point at their competition, what they really mean is we're both Washington insiders. Because anyone who's accepting that money from outside the district is going to be influenced by it, period. We all know this as citizens of the country. The only way to defeat this is to stop electing people who take corporate welfare. And that's what it is. It is the corporations taking in money that is supposed to be economic development money. It's supposed to create jobs. I'm going to tell you 2 things very quickly. One is it doesn't work in general. We have bought into this over and over again. We're smart, we're grown-ups, we get how the political system works, everybody's bought and paid for, but I'm still going to vote for so-and-so because they're the lesser evil and they can bring these jobs to the area. Malta, Global Foundries, $1.2 billion in state money being given to a for-profit foreign company to produce microchips. 800 jobs. Everybody who has a calculator or even simple mathematical capacity can sit down and figure out that 800 jobs at $1.2 billion of public money to subsidize it is insane. The only way it makes sense is if you're smart enough and cynical enough to know that on the secondary and tertiary level, billions of other dollars of public money are going to be spent on development in all these little areas like Glens Falls, all through our communities, and we all quietly go, we're going to get our little piece of the federal pie. Guess who ends up paying all of it? It is all coming from the same wallet. We need to stop voting for people who call that economic development. General Electric can borrow money from the Federal Reserve at 0%. They start a company called GE Capital. They can then lend that money back to banks at interest. Who's paying the interest at the Federal Reserve? A private bank. You and me. Well, okay, are we getting jobs out of it? No, they're pulling out of Fort Edward, firing 200 union workers, and moving to a right-to-work state, and it actually seems like they might be going to Mexico. That doesn't work. So we need to look at economic development as something that needs to be a green jobs program, sustainable, ecologically responsible building of infrastructure.
Thank you. Elise?
A report came out earlier this year, authored by Brad Dake, that talked about some of the issues that we face in the Adirondack region. Our region is aging out, our jobs are leaving this part of New York State, our schools are under an incredible amount of duress budgetarily. I have a few key ideas about how we can grow our economy and ensure that we have a year-round economy in the Adirondacks. One is investing in our infrastructure. My family's business, we have trucks on the road every single week in the Adirondacks. We've seen our customers leave this part of New York State, but we're one of the few wholesalers that still focuses on delivering our products to our hardworking small business customers within the district. Our trucks are on the roads, our roads need help. I hope to be a committed voice to a 21st century infrastructure fund that helps us invest in our roads, in our waterways, in our sewers. Part of that is broadband and cell coverage. Young people running businesses, people who are looking to start businesses, if they don't have access to the technology, it's very difficult to keep pace with the rest of the country and the rest of the world that does have access. So I think investing in broadband, especially that last mile, is critical for our communities. Promoting tourism. There are a few key ways I think we can protect our environmental resources, which of course make the Adirondacks special. Fighting against invasive species to ensure that we have funding and common sense regulations to ensure that we keep our lakes and waterways clean for tourists and clean for economic commerce. I also think there's opportunities to bring manufacturing back to the Adirondacks. And the way we can do that is by lowering our corporate tax rate as a country to make us competitive in a global marketplace today. There are also opportunities to expand biomass in the North Country. That's something that has been proposed by leaders within the Adirondacks. And lastly, our partnerships with Canadian businesses. My family business, we work with Canadian suppliers. It's very important to continue to encourage that economic commerce across the border. So I think investing in all of these ideas, infrastructure, broadband, promoting tourism by keeping our environment clean, pursuing biomass opportunities, and continuing to grow relationships with Canadian businesses are ways we can allow the Adirondacks to flourish.
Thank you. Matt?
Thanks, Ann. You certainly heard a lot of ideas, a lot of good ideas. And, really to summarize, and this is what I do for a living. You have a situation, a company's going to fail. And right now, when we look at the data, you actually look at the hard data, what's going on in the 103 towns and villages that make up the Adirondack Park. You look at the facts. Number one, getting much older. We have people leaving who are school age. We have fewer couples who are having children in the Adirondacks. We have to stop that. So the first thing we have to do is make sure that people can have a quality of life. I've recruited many business to have the type of environment that not only that particular woman who's going to run the company, but her husband and children actually want to be here. So before anyone even thinks about job creation, if you don't have cell phone coverage when you leave here tonight, if you have to drive to Tupper Lake, Ty, or anywhere else, guess what? People aren't going to come and actually start a real business here. That's the way it's going to be. So again, you need a real business person in Washington who's going to doggedly and persistently make sure that we have the part covered with cell phone coverage. I don't care if you live in Hague, you live here in Hague, you live further north, going towards E-Town. If you don't have that type of cell phone coverage, it's not going to happen in a real-time manner. That's the first thing we're going to do. I pledge to each and every person, doesn't matter if you're here tonight, you'll see it in clips, that we are going to have cell phone coverage in the Adirondack Park. Number two, Elise mentioned broadband, she's spot on. But right now we already have sort of a loop. The Development Authority, the North Country, there's a lot of fiber in the ground. But we need to have a public-private partnership to make sure that fiber in the ground and the main trunks get to businesses, get to individuals like yourselves, I'm sure people here, some of you would be interested in that, to actually have that type of economy. Because look, the days of General Electric, like Matt mentioned, GM, they're over for this area. And that's a troubling thing, but guess what? It's a fact. And we need to go forward. It's going to be that young entrepreneur. It's going to be that person who's retired from another career, who loves the Adirondacks, who loves the area, whether they went to school here, grew up here or not, it doesn't matter. And so part of the job of a congressman in this rural area is to help recruit talent. And that's the second piece, is to make sure we get those types of people, get people who want to start lives, who want to have people on the ground and develop business. Because guess what? If you live in the 21st century in terms of technology, you can do pretty much anything anywhere within reason. Look, and lastly, transportation on the ground. You still need to have trucks. Look, I help run Yellow Trucking. We're the largest trucking, less than full truckload trucking concern in America. And we talk about the roads and byways in New York State all the time. They're antiquated, they need to be updated. And the same thing to get in and out, whether it's rail for our products or whether it's flights in terms of our regional airports, we need to make sure that they are not only up to snuff, but actually attracting people and therefore businesses. That's what it comes down to. If you don't lay these groundwork of these basic ideas, it's not going to go ahead and happen. I'm running for Congress to provide people with a choice. So if we do want to have jobs, we do want to have economic growth in the North Country, in the Adirondack Park, give me the opportunity for 2 years, and we'll see results. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third question, Lise will be our first person. How do you see yourself working as a team with the other House members?
That's a great question. I think we need more of that in Washington. I think especially if you look at this past year and the low approval ratings of Congress as a whole, we've seen that Washington is facing gridlock. Washington is completely broken. If you look at the government shutdown, I think actually everyone was at fault, Republicans and Democrats, who refused to put together a long-term budget plan for this country. I think the best way to reach across the aisle is on issues that aren't partisan. One of those issues I think of in this district is Fort Drum. That is an example of an issue where you can work very effectively with other members of the New York State delegation, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to ensure that Fort Drum, the largest single-site employer in New York State, has a bright future and continues to have the resources it needs to grow. I also think I'm willing to work with anyone who has an independent, common-sense solution. This is why I'm running for Congress. I think we need a new generation of leadership. One of the ideas that I've heard discussed is if you actually look at the number of members of Congress who are under the age of 40, there's an even split, amazingly. There are 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans. My theory is, if you lock these people in a room, they're likely to solve and get further along to solving some of the budget issues we face because it's in their generation's best interest to do so. I also think there are creative ways to work across the aisle on issues like ag reform, in terms of having a 21st century farm policy. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, we have Democrats who represent agricultural districts. It's important to work with them on the issues that face the 21st Congressional District. So I am a principled candidate, but I'm also someone who's willing to work with anyone who has a good idea, whether they're a Green Party candidate, a Democrat, or an independent, and I look forward to doing that in Washington.
Thank you. Matt?
What was the question again?
The question was, How do you see yourself working as a team with the other House members?
Well, in business, you have to go ahead and compromise to get things done. And right now, compromise has become a dirty word in Washington. It leads to primaries, it leads to members of the House who've been there a long time getting voted out because, God forbid, they try to move the country forward. You see it time and time again. To be honest with you, you saw it last night. I'm a businessman. Every deal you do, it can't be perfect for you and terrible for the other side, otherwise things won't actually get done. See, it's just the common sense of people who become part of the system, who become Washington insiders, whose only goal in life is to continue to be reelected time and time again. Look, my goal is very simple. I want to help the North Country. Right now we have tough times. We have unemployment rates that are way too high. We have people who are hurting. We have economies and communities that are slowly growing old and essentially we're going to die. We need to change this. We need a shot of economic adrenaline. The only way we're going to get it, guess what? New York State is working across the aisle. So be very clear. I'm going to do everything I can in my power with Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand to work closely together to provide, again, cell phone coverage in the Adirondacks. And all the other initiatives that I talked about and we will continue to talk about. But in the House, we have to compromise. It's that simple. If not, we're going to have more deadlock. We're going to have less things being produced, and we have tremendous issues that need to be solved here in the United States. So all I can pledge to you is, will I work with anyone? The answer is absolutely. Again, the score sheet to be graded for me is, have we created more jobs? Have we improved economically and therefore improved the lives of the people in the 21st Congressional District? It's not a Democratic question. It's not a Republican question. Foodie, it's not even a Green Party question, my friend. It's how are we going to move things forward here? And again, you have to work with everyone, and especially in New York State, you have to work with the 2 United States Senators. I pledge to do that, including Governor Cuomo, to make sure that we advance the agenda, whether it's cell phone coverage, whether it's a core economic opportunity, all over the park. That's what I pledge to you, and that's how we'll work across the aisle. Thanks, Ann.
Thank you. Matthew.
Well, I like that Ann is calling me Matthew, because that's what my mother calls me, and not the same age as my mother, but you are similarly graceful and beautiful. You, however, are not allowed to call me Foodie and do it again. Essentially, how I work with members of the House. I've already joked a little bit about that I probably am going to be the kid who's like, sitting in his room, reading a book and wondering where all the other kids that are meeting to play basketball. I don't really think that at all would be the case if a Green was elected to Congress. I think what actually would happen is when Elise talks about younger people being elected to Congress, so that they're not all old white men with lots of money, but that they're young people with lots of money. My only disagreement is how about without the lots of money part? Because that already shows me that they're bought and paid for. How about we elect workers to Congress? Because they're the group that is unrepresented in Congress. People who get up at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning and go to work and work 40, 50, 60 hours a week to have that standard of living I talked about my grandfather had by working on the floor at a glove mill in the 1950s. Now, if we want to talk about how am I going to work with those people, I'm not. I'm not, because they won't let me, because I'm not sponsored by a corporation. What you do when you send me to Congress is you show the rest of the country that some places in this world, especially here in the United States, are not any longer going to be bought and sold by a bunch of multinational corporations who are trying to control not just our government and how business is done here, but the government of the entire world. Now, Ron Paul said something a long time ago that I have great respect for, because I feel like I'm so far to the left, I am to the right too. I really do. There's so much common ground between libertarians and Greens, it's frightening. Most of it is that we're sick and tired of the manipulation of our democratic system. And I understand it's a Republican. Just saying. Ron Paul always said, as a physician, not going to perform an abortion. As a human being, against them. However, I'm in Congress. If my constituency wants me to vote a certain way on an abortion bill, I will do it. Because as the Bible says, give Caesar what is due unto Caesar. Give God what is due unto God, to paraphrase. God probably said it a lot better than I did. But the bottom line is he understood the difference in his roles. I can be that kind of representative in Congress. I can advocate for ideas that are new and different and that are being choked to death and stopped by large corporate influence, and I will get get media attention nationally because I'm the first non-corporate human being elected to this office in 50 years. If you want me to compromise with people, ask yourself this. In my 46 years, what's Congress done for you if you work for a living? Name one piece of legislation.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, follow that.
I need more green time for you tonight.
Endorsing you before this is
Keep talking about Ron Paul, I don't know, they're gonna.
Next question. This is a toughie. If elected, will we ever see you in Hague again?
Adler, what do you think? Am I heading back to the parade or no? All right, so I got one day. Really good question, great question. It comes down to what I call customer service, which we call in the congressional world constituent service. And so my plan is a little bit different than what we've had before. Because I think if you live in Hague, if you live way up on the border in Messina or whatnot, you shouldn't have to drive 2 hours to see your, not only congressman or their staff, the actual congressional office. So we're going to do something different. What we're going to do is forget the old model. And because the district is so big, we're talking a little under 17,000 square miles, we need to have more offices. And we're going to have more people on the ground helping. And you heard my plans. We're going to do big things and turn the economy around. That's not going to be from everybody sitting in Washington. So 2 things. Number one, we're going to have a lot more offices. They will be Adirondack offices. Just because you don't live in Watertown or Plattsburgh or Glens Falls, still should have representation on the ground. They're helping the local leaders every day, whether it's political, not-for-profit, business, or economic development leaders. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, 2 things. First of all, I'm not going to prank. Like, remember, sometimes Congressman Owens would send you those mailers that look glossy. We're not doing that. There's done with that. No more advertising. Funiciello can even agree with this. No more corporate advertising from a congressman at our time. And secondly, instead of having everybody in Washington, worry about what's going on in Capitol Hill, we're going to have people, disproportionate amount of people in the district, working with leaders from Thurman to Messina and everywhere in between, talking about the issues and making sure that we get things done here. It's going to be a little different. We're going to have much more physical presence here to make sure people are getting things done. Whether it's someone who needs assistance in terms of a VA clinic or hospital, Social Security, from a passport, it could be something large or something small. It's time that we have more people on the ground to actually help. Just like a company would in terms of customer service, that's what we need to do. And I pledge to you that's what we're going to have all over the Adirondacks, the 101 towns and villages that are in this district. We're going to have several offices to make sure that that comes to fruition. And once every 2 years, my wife hates this one, by the way, I'm going to have a town hall in every single town. So the answer is not only for the fancy parades here in Hague, but once every 2 years, maybe this room, some other room, where you get to actually sit down and for whatever period of time, talk to your congressperson. That's what I pledge. It's going to be constituent service, and you get to see your congressman at least once a term to make sure that your voice is being heard, and equally as important, what we need to do on the ground. There's a lot of hard work to be done here in the Adirondacks in terms of revitalizing the region, both economically and practically, and that's how we're going to do it, by having boots on the ground. Thanks, Ed.
If you elect me to Congress, I'm probably going to get a massive salary increase, and I'm going to get health insurance, which I don't have right now, and which my workers don't have as well. I'm going to have enough vacation time that I can buy a cottage and a motorboat, and I'm going to become a total sellout, and I'm no longer going to represent the working class. I don't mean that. That's not what I'm talking about. Because I'm running this race out of principle. And I would love to come and visit Hague. You know how many times I've been here since I was a child? 3 times. The reality is, do you want me to go to Congress to fight for and advocate for legislation, or do you want me to come to your parade or your duck race? What's a congressperson? A joke? Somebody we parade out so that we can pretend that they carry some importance for us personally, or are they someone to actually have a relationship with? That's a good thing. I'm not against the idea of town hall meetings or getting together, but when your feelings are hurt in a 16,000, I believe, square mile congressional district that your congressperson's not here, had patting you on the back all the time and talking to you about whether or not you feel okay, you have an issue with you actually think Congress does something it's not supposed to do. I want to change that culture. A congressperson is not supposed to be the guy who fixes the little problems you have with bureaucracy. Congressman's the guy, or a congresswoman, who is supposed to say, why is that bureaucracy there? Why, when a soldier comes back from Iraq or Afghanistan, where they shouldn't even have been sent in the first place, why aren't we taking care of those guys when they come back? Why are 22 of them killing themselves every month? Why don't they have access to VA hospitals? Why don't they have access to regular hospitals? I'll tell you why, because of bureaucratic nonsense. Someone needs to be in Washington fighting for my friends, the workers you sent there, my father who's a veteran, my uncle and my aunt who are veterans. Why aren't they getting the care they deserve when they come back? Because we all want people at the duck race. We want to say, we got them. You know, our congressman cared enough to be there. How about let him go to Washington and do the job you elected him for? So I probably won't be in Hague any more frequently than I am right now, and that's a disappointment because you all seem very receptive, and it's a beautiful place. And last time I was up here was to go canoeing with my father when I was probably about 16 years old. It was one of the best experiences I've ever had, but I'm not going to say I haven't had that experience numerous other times in the Adirondack Park, because it's gorgeous. We live in God's country, and we all know that. It's what binds us together. We shouldn't have to struggle so hard in it, is why you're going to elect me to go to D.C.
Elise?
As I've been driving around this very large district, it is clear that the brick and mortar model of having congressional offices isn't good enough. It takes people 2 to 3 hours to drive to meet with staff of their congressman, or hopefully congresswoman. I want to have a mobile district office, and by that I mean other representatives who represent districts that are even larger than this out on the western part of the United States. They have a district office on wheels that drives around and visits each and every town. I am committed to visiting each and every town, each 194 of them, with a mobile district office so that Washington is coming to you. Your congressional office is coming to you to actually have accessible constituent services there. The other idea I have is transparency and accountability. I think Washington needs to focus on holding their elected representatives accountable and making them more transparent. How do we do that? 2 models that I want to apply are Facebooking and tweeting every single vote that I take in Congress. Too often our representatives take votes and then they don't want to talk to constituents about them. I think we need to have 100% transparency so that you hear firsthand from the constituents what their responses are to the legislation that you're voting on. Additionally, I want to list my schedule publicly. Actually, the representative who did that for the first time represented this part of New York State when Kirsten Gillibrand was a member of Congress. She was the first member of Congress to list her schedule publicly to make it available to her constituents. I hope to do that as well. I hope to be a new generation of transparent, accountable, and independent thinkers. So that, in addition to the mobile congressional office, I think are new outside of the box, and they're a great fit for this district, which is incredibly large. Thank you.
Thank you. Back up. You. Thank you.
You're confusing me. It's easy to do.
Question number 5. What is your position on term limits for members of Congress?
Many, many years ago, some of you may recall this, although I don't think any of us are really old enough to have been there. There was a thought process that those elected to Congress on some very idyllic level were the gentleman farmer. You know, because farmers weren't just the tools of economic subsidy way back in that day. The lawyer, country lawyer, you know, the guy who was probably middle class, not working class, somewhat educated, had enough money, just enough money that they could take a little bit of time off from working every single day, and they could travel to Washington, D.C., and allow their business or their farm to fall into complete disarray as they try to actually be a public servant. How many of you think that's what's going on in Congress right now? How many Congress people are millionaires? How many of them use this as a career step to become lobbyists? How disgusting is it? What we as voters are responsible for, because we're the ones voting for them, and we can stop doing that. I have a lot of libertarian and conservative friends who feel like it's the end of the world. Equally, I have a lot of people on the Occupy side of the fence who feel it's the end of the world. They're collecting guns. All I'm going to say is that really the choice we want to make? The only way this is all going to end is with a bloody revolution. And I see, is that as imaginative as we can be as human beings? Is that as much love and compassion as we can muster for the people in our family, people in our community, our friends, people of the world, living things, that we think that's what we have to do?
The question is,
How about instead of that, we understand that we could just vote differently. And if we vote differently, we start voting for those who are not going to Congress to become millionaires, we can go back to the country doctor, the country lawyer, representing us in Congress. Term limits are something that we can say are constitutional or not constitutional, much like that very idyllic vision of what it was to represent other human beings and citizens in this country back at the dawn of our democracy. I am for that service being temporary, so other voices are heard. I have to admit that when you look at people like Dennis Kucinich or Ron Paul, equally amazing human beings on both sides of this false fence and the theater of Washington, D.C., I would love for them to be in Congress until they die. So it's hard for me to say I'm strongly for term limits, because occasionally an exception happens, but I do know that it's the right thing to do. So if you vote for me, I would vote for term limits.
thank you. Please.
I support term limits, and I believe I'm the only candidate to actually term limit myself and take a pledge for my own personal term limits. I believe we need to move this country into more of a direction of citizen representatives rather than career politicians. I've taken a term limit pledge that if I'm lucky enough to be elected and to earn your support, I will serve no longer than 5 terms, a total of 10 years. Because if I can't get the job done in 10 years, I think it's someone else's opportunity. This morning I was actually asked a question about my age, and they said, well, as a 29-year-old, what do you think you'll be able to accomplish in Congress? And I said, well, Congress would be much better off if we had 29-year-old representatives rather than people that have been there for 29 years, which is what we currently have in this country. I believe that Congress should live by their own laws. We have too many career politicians that receive special subsidies for their health care, that are allowed to make investments with insider information. And I think we need to scrap all of this special treatment and require every member of Congress to live by their own laws. That's the first piece of legislation I plan to introduce on day 1, and I hope you will hold me accountable to my 10-year term limit pledge.
Thank you.
Thanks. I believe in good old-fashioned citizen legislation. I've been a businessman. That's what I've done for the last decade and a half. And I put myself out here. And if anybody turns on the TV at night, you know that I'm taking a little shrapnel. And the reason I'm doing that is not because I want to go to Washington and start a 30-year career. It's the exact opposite. Because I think, honestly, you need people with real business experience. Someone who understands how to create and save jobs. Who understands the difference between a balance sheet and an income statement. Right now, it's not about age. We don't need any more 29-year-olds. We don't need 80-year-olds. We need people who understand how hard it is to create a job, to keep a job, and to keep an economy moving forward. Because with that, kids can stay. You'll see your grandkids more. People will have productive lives and can do it right wherever they want, including here in the middle of the Adirondacks. That's why. At the end of the day, do I believe in term limits? Sure. I mean, the best term limit is individuals voting someone out of office. And that's what I say. If I'm fortunate enough to get sent to Washington, every 2 years, great. See how we're doing. Like I said, everything I'm going to do is geared towards, is it going to improve the lives? Is it going to improve the economy? Will it create more jobs? Will it create the opportunity to go ahead and have people live here in productive lives? It's simple as that. I should be graded every 2 years. That's how the founding fathers wanted it. It wasn't supposed to be this long-term career. Look, that's a fundamental difference between my opponents and I. I just have a different view as to what the short-term duration should be in office, and guess what? I will take hard votes. I guarantee you I will make votes in this room that even if everyone's Republican, sorry man, that you will disagree with. Because that's why the system's broken, because people want to go to Washington and they want to hang out, and that's their career. And again, why can't you vote the right way for your district and for your country? Well, people get nervous because, ooh, I'll get primary. Oh no, what if I don't get elected? But guess what? If your whole career has been based in Washington, D.C., if your whole background isn't focused on how do you get to Washington, if your whole mindset is how can I actually help a region where I grew up, then you can take those votes. And if people don't like what you did at the end of 2 years, so be it, there'll be someone else to fill those shoes. So that's my view in terms of term limits. It should be done. At the end of the day, will I gladly, whether it's 4 or 5 terms, it doesn't matter what the number is. Everyone should have the right to make sure that they have a new representative if they like every 2 years. That's called voting. That's the way the Constitution was set up. And so at the end of the day, am I going to stay there for a long, long time if I'm fortunate enough to be there? The answer is absolutely not. Make sure, that gets my wife, by the way, in, so she'll like that. Thank you.
And start with these times. The question, what is your position on the Keystone Pipeline?
That's a pretty straightforward question. I am for it. I think this is an example of the president choosing to pursue job-killing policies and blocking energy independence in this country. I believe we need to have an all-of-the-above approach. I think we all feel the high prices of gas and electricity and oil in this country. We feel this in our business. We have to make the tough decisions with high gas prices, with our trucks on the road. Do we add on a fuel surcharge to our customer, or can we absorb that as a small business? We need to become energy independent in this country and pursue an all-of-the-above approach instead of picking and choosing certain energy sectors to subsidize. This also is part of the fracking discussion. I also support fracking because it's a job creator. New York State is losing out on economic opportunity while other states like Pennsylvania, North Dakota are gaining. So I support the Keystone Pipeline. I support pursuing an energy independence policy in this country. And I support it's a job creator.
Elise, the next question was on fracking, so if you want,
We can maybe we'll merge together.
I thought if you wanted to, since they're kind of intertwined.
Sure. So as I said before, I also support fracking. We see other states gaining, like Pennsylvania, North Dakota, whose economies are booming. I think New York State should take advantage of our natural resources in an environmentally friendly way. President Obama even supports fracking, and Governor Cuomo has failed to make a decision on this issue, and we should be fracking in New York State. It would help grow our economy.
Thank you. So we are combining question 6 and 7. What is your position on the Keystone Pipeline, and what is your position on fracking?
Look, I agree. I think we need to frack. When you look at the revolution that's going on around the world, and in particular in many states except for here in New York State. North Dakota, unemployment rate, 3%. If anybody wants to go to work and get a job, go to North Dakota. Why? Energy exploration. It's just common sense. If you live in the southern tier of New York State, you know the difference when you cross over that line from New York to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, booming. The shale revolution, the Marcellus Shale, is palpable. Like, I have a dear friend who owns a hotel in Elmira, New York. Everyone, you can't even get a hotel room anymore in northern Pennsylvania. They come across the state line to stay in Elmira. It's common sense. It's unconscionable that Governor Cuomo won't let us tap our own natural resources, which not only will provide an economic boom, but give us energy independence. Now, part and parcel of that, when you talk about the Keystone Pipeline, yeah, of course I'm in favor of it. I mean, it's a no-brainer. But I also in favor of it for an environmental reason. Because when you're transporting this crude, some of it's, heavier, dirtier stuff, instead of by pipeline, it's going to move around the country and the world. That's the way it will move around. So instead of going to a pipeline that has been done, for many, many years, it's going to get on a rail car, it's going to get on a boat. Just create environmental difficulties. It creates more opportunities for unfortunate things to happen. So again, let's just build a pipeline. It's going to be safe, it's going to work. And at the same time, let's keep the crude off the tankers, out of the rail cars, which they were going to be put in if we don't build the Keystone Pipeline. It's a common sense solution, something that Congress and the President don't get done every day. We need to change different people going to Washington to get these common sense results. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Given that the Greens have let me use their ballot status, I guess I'll have to say what you all know I'm gonna say. But I believe it too, and that's that I'm against the continued lack of imagination. Is this the best we can do, really? You know, we know fossil fuel is bad for us. We know that it's killing us. I don't care if you believe in climate change or not. It doesn't really matter to me. I know you're not going to stand over a smokestack at Finch Prine and breathe in what's coming out of the planet, because we're not lacking that imagination. You also didn't stand in front of a campfire when the smoke's going on your face and not turn around. It's not good for us. If there are other ways of creating energy that are sustainable, that are ecologically conscious, and with technology moving like it is, there are thousands of these technologies available. We're just letting the oil companies dictate what we do. Because again, we're electing people that the oil companies are buying the seats for. Stop doing it. You know, let's stop doing it altogether. I'm not lecturing you, I'm saying, let's just not do it anymore. Let's see what would happen if we actually elected people to office who were going to look at imaginative answers. Has anybody seen the movie October Sky, which came out probably about 2 decades ago? October Sky is about the space race, basically from the position of being a kid when it happened. Imagine what it was like. I wasn't born then. I was born in '67. What must it have been like to imagine what it would be like to go to the moon? What was the space race like for those of us who weren't born yet? It was a real interesting glimpse into that. Why can't we, as a people, elect people to Congress and the Senate who start to have ideas, start to attach themselves to ideas that are that imaginative and that visionary? Because we went to the moon, remember? We did it. And we did it because someone was elected to office who said, hey, this would be really great. Why don't we try it out? Everyone said it's too much money, you're a crazy man, you're on the wrong side of the fake political theater, but we did it anyway. What I would say to you is right now, just as an example, I have posted on my congressional Facebook page, soon to be my website, a TED Talk, which is about solar roadways. And it's not something I'm endorsing, but it's fascinating. And it's the idea that we could create roads all across the country that aren't made of asphalt. They're made of photovoltaic cells. They don't need to be snow plowed because they have heating wires through them, just like the window in your car does. They're lit by themselves. If we did this over a period of time, we'd have enough energy. We'd have 3 times more energy than we currently use. It would cost a lot of money, but guess what would happen if we did it? We'd create jobs. Is this being talked about in Congress? Probably not.
Can you start my driveway?
Yeah. I will.
Because I went out of order with the question, I'm trying to figure out where I am in the ABCs and the CBAs. So back to A, you're right. Matt,
Yes.
what improvements do you think the government should make in the Veterans Health Care Program?
I mean, it's a crime and a travesty what's going on. We saw it in Phoenix and other places, out in the West, where it's taking, an intolerably long amount of time for people to get treatment. And what we need to do is 3 basic things. And this is what I want all my private sector experience in terms of understanding how to change this. The first thing is accountability. I mean, right now, certainly, I called for and in general resigned in terms of leading the VA, but we need to make sure that this never happens again. And people who work within government need to be actually held accountable. It's quite simple. The people who are not doing the job, but more importantly, and much more seriously, people who are lying and falsifying facts and figures to actually try to hide the mess, to actually not be just frank, that's the bigger problem, that people are trying to cover up what's actually happening on the ground. People need to be fired, held accountable, and whatever happens in the legal process, so be it. Number 2, flexibility. And I think this is the biggest change, especially up here in the northern country, that we need to change. Right now, everything's tied to a clinic in the hospital systems, whether you live on the western side, for Syracuse, over in this neck of the woods, for Albany. We need to get to a different model allowing flexibility. I was going door to door today, talked to one gentleman in Lake George, happens to be a veteran, happens to use the VA clinics and hospital relatively frequently. I said, how you doing? No, I'm doing fine. But you know what the problem is that basically just, I need every 6 months or so, get a script. I have to go all the way down, take the hour and change drive to Albany to actually get a script from a doctor. I go, that's the only reason you go. It's the only reason I go, once every 6 months. So what if you had a local doctor, whether it's Glens Falls or one of the clinics? Would that take care of everything? Yeah. See, it's common sense like that to say, why does everything have to be a VA hospital? Why can't we have the same system working flexible with our local hospitals? I mean, one of the challenges of our local hospitals, doesn't matter if it's Malone, CVPH in Plattsburgh, whether it's Saratoga, whether it's Glens Falls, Elizabethtown, is actually making sure that we have patients. That's part of the bottom line. So it's a win-win, it's a common sense measure. It's a lot of flexibility instead of going all the way down to Syracuse or Albany to actually be able to use your local doctors and get script and all those other types of procedures. And so when you think about that, you think about what actually makes sense, you need to have transparency. And that's what is so scary, that people are falsifying and not actually telling the truth. You need to have the accountability to make sure people get the job done, to know what the truth is in terms of transparency. But lastly, we'll make life better here in the North Country and the Adirondacks is flexibility to pick your doctors and be able to use the VA system that actually works for you, not one size fits all. Makes sense in business, makes sense, and it should work for the government. Thank you.
I'm going to start by saying we have an amazing healthcare problem in this country, and it's why we have an issue with the VA. We have a VA system, we have a congressional system that are being funded by public money. We have Medicare, we have Medicaid, we have private insurance, we have pharmaceutical research being done at public universities. We have hospitals that are economic development in my hometown currently and in one 10 miles away, both with incredibly small populations. Now, here's a dollar, and I want to show it to you not as a parlor trick, but as a reminder as I speak to you about this, that our VA problems, our Medicare problems, our Medicaid problems, our lack of health insurance problems can all be resolved very simply, and this is how. Here are the two halves, more or less, of this dollar. And I'm going to tape it back together and use it later because I can't afford to throw it away. This is how much public money is being spent of every health care dollar spent in our country. It's 52 cents. That's as of the Bull Handler study done by a Harvard doctor who was an advocate for single-payer health care, which is the system used by every other industrialized country in the world in one form or another, almost every single one of which is a better system than ours. I only have direct knowledge of the Canadian one. I promise you, it's much better than anything I or my family or my friends have experienced here. We have a horrible medical system here. You have no idea. And whether it's Fox TV lying to you about it, or the New York Times lying to you about it, they're both lying. They don't want us to have single payer. There's way too much money in it. So much profits being stolen, tax money being stolen, to put into these economic development machines that aren't economic development. And it's leaving 50 to 80 million people without insurance. What if a soldier was just an American citizen and had access to health care at whatever hospital or doctor for free because he already paid for it? Would we have a VA problem? Would there be a huge fiefdom? Would there be a massive bureaucracy preventing him from getting treatment for PTSD? No. He'd walk into a hospital and he'd get taken care of. Canadians pay half the amount of money we do per person for everyone in their country to be covered with health care. 100%. Imagine that. No co-pays. You're not getting sued for medical bills you owed, which is the single highest reason why people lose their homes in the United States at the moment, aside from bailouts. When we go past that to understand that we can resolve that whole problem overnight by taking the age of Medicare, turning it from 65 to 0. There's a bill in Congress for that. Ask them if they'll support it, because I want my 52 cents back if you're not going to.
Thank you. Please.
We absolutely have a crisis in this country with our veterans' health care, and I think the Secretary of the VA's decision to resign is only just the start of solving the problem. This problem goes much deeper into the roots of the bureaucracy. This is a broken, federalized healthcare system, and I actually think it's a bit of an omen of where we're headed as a country with our healthcare in general, with Obamacare, as we federalize 1/6 of our economy. There are a few key steps I would take to improve our veterans' care. One is, and it's similar to my primary opponent, Matt Doheny's idea, I've talked to military veterans all throughout this district. I've formed a military veterans advisory team of veterans, young and old, who are located in Saratoga County, in Franklin County, in Clinton County, and in so many cases, they have to drive 2 to 3 hours in the middle of winter to access their care. Meanwhile, they're driving right by hospitals, doctors' offices, where they should be able to access higher quality and more cost-effective care. So I think we immediately should allow all of our veterans to have access to private hospitals. Again, I agree with you that it benefits our hospitals in this district in terms of receiving reimbursements. But the other way I think we can reform the VA system is there should be no bonuses paid for our VA workers. This past year, if you look at the number of taxpayer-funded bonuses paid, that's a travesty. With a system that's broken, no bonuses whatsoever, so I would not support any bonuses paid. I also think we have unique challenges for our young veterans and our young servicemen and women who are returning from deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's a great program actually located in the Adirondacks called Homeward Bound. It's a community organization that goes into veterans communities. I know there's a shift at the national level to provide online counseling for our recently returned veterans. That's not good enough. We need to go into our households and provide the support to our military families and our veterans families. So I hope to partner with some of those community organizations to think outside of the box and talk about some of these unique issues that our young veterans are facing, whether it's how to reintegrate into their families, how to find a job in this challenging economy. But the current system is absolutely not working, and it is an example of where we're headed as a country with our broader healthcare system under Obamacare.
Thank you. Matt, you're next. Matthew. The question is, what is your position on the current personal income tax structure?
As you can imagine, I did speak earlier a little bit about tax reform. I think one of the problems most of us have in discussing taxation of any sort and whether or not we feel it's free is that we often leave out all of the subsidy that we are paying with our tax dollars. A friend asked me once why I was so vehemently against McDonald's. And I said, well, not only is it terrible, poisonous food that's killing us all, but I already paid for it 5 times by the time you bought the $1 menu hamburger. You know, do you not get that? That when we subsidize corporate ag, and we subsidize the company, and we subsidize their payroll, which we do, and we subsidize their workers who are too poor to afford any of the benefits we all know they need, I don't want to pay for that hamburger. So I'm forced to keep paying for the hamburger, just like I said with the healthcare insurance mechanism. And on top of that, I'm going to go to the farmer's market and spend 3 times more money buying mescaline for a salad that was grown by a local farmer who I trust. And knowing that food is good for me. The same thing is true when we talk about tax reform. You know, we have to come up with an entirely new idea, and we have to be committed to understanding that we're going to keep getting raked over the coals while we are building an alternative. There are lots of alternatives that are much better than having an IRS and New York State Taxation and Finance and millions of lines of tax code, which is, as a business owner, it's all I can imagine it is, because God knows I'm not cracking that book. What I do know is that there are a lot of models that are out there around the world that we refuse to even think about or discuss at the federal level. One of the ones I'm most fond of is the idea that when we go back to our founding documents, you don't tax labor. There was an understanding that if people are breaking their back digging holes or carrying hay bales around or dealing with animal husbandry or working in a factory, don't hit them up for money. You know, they're just making enough to feed themselves and to put a roof over their children's head. Let them be. You know, as a friend pointed out, unless they're foreign labor. But that's a whole other issue. What if we were just to set up a tax base that wasn't built around subsidy of huge corporations, and therefore we wouldn't require the amount of taxation we're bringing in right now to support the Walmarts and the McDonald's of this world and the GEs? What if instead we went to a system of no subsidies for anybody, but just wages for those who are at the bottom? Which is why I advocate for something along the lines of a flat tax, but I prefer it to be a consumption tax, a value-added tax that is also encompassing a progressive income taxation mechanism for those who are making, say, more than 100 grand. In that way, there's fairness all the way around.
Thank you.
As I spoke about in my introduction, pursuing fundamental tax reform is one of my top priorities. It has been over the course of the campaign. It will be if I'm able to serve and represent this district. Taxes are too high in New York State, in this country. We feel it firsthand. I feel it firsthand. Other states around the country are pursuing a zero income tax. And you know what the results are? Their economies are booming, while New York State continues to rank number 50 in being business friendly. We're the least friendliest state to businesses across the country, and our high personal income taxes is part of the reasons. I want to pursue fundamental tax reform from top to bottom to have a flatter, fairer, simpler tax code. I think we should do that at the federal level. I also think we should pursue that in New York State. Get rid of the loopholes, get rid of the special interest aspects of the tax code. If you were to ask most members of Congress whether they fill out their own taxes, the vast majority, I would guess probably 80 or 90% probably do not fill out their own taxes because the own tax code that they've written is way too complicated. Over 80% of Americans have to rely on outside help to fill out their tax codes. This is an example of Washington gone out of control. We continue to add line after line, thousands, pages after thousand pages to overly complicate the tax code. I think if you look across the country at states that have pursued lower income taxes and lower tax rates at the state level, we've seen the economic growth that stems from that. So we need to pursue that at the federal level, but also at the state level.
Thank you. Matt?
Well, I'm fortunate enough to be elected to Congress. I am going to advocate for a very simple and level tax. Right now, we have a tax system where we have a million different rates, and we have so many different subsidies, we have so many different deductions, and everything baked in there. That's why, as Elise correctly said, no one can even fill out their no taxes at some point. It's out of control. And so we need to go ahead and collapse the rates, make them very simple across the board, and get government out of the business of picking winners and losers. I mean, like out there, I'm sure everybody has their own favorite programs and things they'd like to see, but it's not our job as Congress people, it's not our job as taxpayers to fund someone's idea of what they think a good program is. The whole idea is to bring in enough revenue to go ahead and fund our government. Now, that's the second part. The second part is we've got to stop the out-of-control spending. So 3 things I deeply believe in as a businessman and something I will pursue every day in Congress is number 1, we need to go program by program, sub-department by sub-department, and audit the books. And find out if the program's successful or not. If the program's successful, if it's achieved its goals, okay, we can continue it. But right now, time and time again, these programs get put into place, legislation's passed, regulations promulgated, and they go on forever. You know, President Reagan had a great line. The closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. You have to change that mentality. And so how do we do it? We have to audit it. Number 2, balanced budget. You have to have a balanced budget amendment because guess what? The rascals in Washington, doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat, just continue to spend our money out of control. Again, if you want to become part of the system and have a great Washington career, you are not going to take the tough votes, you are not going to make the tough choices to say we have to stop the out of control spending. It's just common sense. Again, make the tax code fair. Not that you're part of a special program, not that you have a great lobbyist that will somehow get you a deduction, an offset, a credit, all those words that everybody loves. If the end of the day, it just takes our money. We need to have a flat, simple, fair system with very clear levels that, you know what, if you go ahead, you know what your tax rate is going to be. It's common sense. It happens every day in your own family, your own business, your own not-for-profit. That's what Washington needs to do. That's why I'm asking for your vote on June 24th. Give it the opportunity to go educate some folks and to actually bring some common sense to Washington. Flat taxes, and actually truly understand what we're spending line by line and actually having a balanced budget. It's common sense. It seems to be not common in Washington. Thanks.
Thank you. Elise, you're up first. And the question, what is your stance in regards to the immigration issue?
This is a great question. I do not support amnesty. I think as we deal with the immigration crisis in our country, we need to first secure the borders. That's something that Washington has talked about for many, many years, and they failed to make it happen. So that is rule number one, that I think when you're dealing with this crisis, we need to make sure that the funding and the implementation actually happens to secure the borders. Number two, I think this country is built upon the rule of law. We need to ensure that we have a legal immigration system and that we don't allow those who have jumped the line and have come here illegally get in front of those that have come here legally and are waiting in line in the process. I think we need to have an employer verification system to ensure that jobs that are out there that are very difficult to create in these economic times, that they're given to American citizens who are working very hard to ensure that they have opportunity in this country. But I also, I believe that it's very important for our next representative to ensure that we continue to have representation talking about the northern border. So much of the discussion at the national level dealing with immigration and border issues focuses on the southern border. But as you know, in this district, we border with our largest trading partner, Canada. And it's very important that we continue to have the economic commerce across the border with our Canadian businesses. So I hope to be a member of the Northern Border Caucus to bring up those issues to ensure that we're represented in the immigration debate. There's also another issue that I would like to take out of the national immigration debate and focus on it in terms of how it affects agriculture. The H-2A visa program, which deals with our ag workers. As I travel to visit with family farms and farmers throughout the district, there's no certainty there. They need to ensure that there's certainty in that program. So I would take the H-2A visa program out of the comprehensive immigration bill and deal with it separately so that there's a 3 to 5 year window for our ag workers, which will help provide some certainty for our farmers in this district.
Thank you. You're all getting your exercise tonight.
Yes, ma'am, Mrs. McDonald. With immigration, we have a problem. Depending on what part of the country you live in terms of how acute the problem is. We tried amnesty. We tried it. I mean, President Reagan, anyone who's Republican here probably fondly remembers President Reagan. We tried it. What was the result? Well, we had two unfortunate things that materialized when we passed essentially legislation that allowed amnesty. Number one, the effect immediately was transmitted to south of the border. It just was. It's amazing that people say, oh, they're migrant farm workers, so on and so forth. Amazing the level of sophistication and understanding when it comes to their own lives and bread and butter. Basically said, come on in, amnesty's fine, here we go. Number two, how many illegal immigrants do we have in the country right now? We don't know. Certainly everyone estimates between 10 to 12 million. Again, it all went back to legislation in the mid-'80s. So we tried that. Part of, again, what I keep saying in Congress, let's do things that work, let's finance things that work, and let's stop things that don't work. Amnesty didn't work. I don't know why we would think it can work this time. Now, as Elise correctly said, when you get up further north there, it's different. And so when I think about, immigration, it's making sure that we go ahead and live up to the promise for people who spend 6-7 years going through the legal immigration process, who do all the heavy lifting, who become U.S. citizens, who are taxpayers, paying into Social Security and the like. Let's respect them by going ahead and actually enforcing the law. Truly, enforcing the law. And if you're caught, you have to go back home. It's just common sense. I don't understand why that becomes such a challenge. Now, we do have migrant labor issues. We do have people in different industries. Elise mentioned the farms. It's a real issue. And so again, as a thoroughbred businessman, what I'm going to do is work with people across the aisle. I'm sure there's plenty of rural area Democrats, et cetera, that will say, you know what, we need to have a plan for 3 to 5 years. Because at the end of the day, what Congress is failing on is providing a budget blueprint for people who rely on these programs, who need to rely on what actually is going to be the policy coming down as we go forward over the next 3 to 5 years. Like if you're milking cows, anybody who's been around dairy farm knows that you need someone there who did the 2 or 3 milking every single day, all 365 days a year. And I've asked hundreds, literally hundreds of farmers, whether you're in Washington County or Jefferson County, why can't you hire the local kids? And they said, man, stop. Of course we did. They don't come back to work after a week, a day, a month, whatever the case might be. We actually, again, agriculture is a huge business, if not the largest business in the 21st Congressional District. I will make sure that we have a 3 to 5 year program that people can come in and work on farms, whether it's dairy, picking apples, which we already have somebody's 2A program. And again, it's a common sense measure. I think we can get it done. It has to be taken out of the politics and work across the aisle. That much I commit to the family of farmers and the people who milk cows every day. We can get it done. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're really funny, Matt. Those of you who followed the congressional race in 2012 and know that there was a Green candidate at that point in time might be expecting me to say something outrageous. I'm not going to. What I am going to say is Doheny doesn't sound like a Native American name to me. And neither does Stefanik, and certainly neither does Funiciello. And the reason for that is because they're not. We don't own this country. We took it. We took it from people we called Indians, because we're dumb enough that we thought we were in India. Okay, we all know this. We all know this. We've graduated out of elementary school and middle school and high school. We've read books. We've talked to each other. We've watched PBS. We get it. Okay, so what should our response be? I don't know about you guys, but my great-grandfather built railroads. He was brought here as a cheap source of labor because there was no longer slavery, kind of. Okay, so we didn't want African Americans to any longer be used for free labor. Instead, we were going to have Italian and Irish and Chinese and Polish immigrants kill each other for jobs, which somehow was more sane and just. It's always the same mechanism. It is not those people desperately trying to get here because they love the United States. It's that we've been in Mexico and South America destroying their standard of living by allowing multinationals to move to those countries and rip peasants off of their lands and back military juntas and groups that are paramilitary, guerrillas. You know, we don't even know as citizens anymore what the CIA and all of our military mechanisms are up to in these countries. But I promise you what they're up to is when we sign NAFTA and GATT, what they're up to is moving there. Because Mexico and China and Vietnam are much better places to set up a factory because you can pay somebody $2 a day. You know, you can pollute the river, you can shoot a union organizer, it's all good. That's the same reason why we have Mexican and Jamaican migrant laborers in District 21 picking apples and milking cows. And all I'm going to say again is if I already paid for the milk, then at the very least, if you are going to promote the idea that you want to bring in what we like to call illegal aliens, I will just say people from another country. They're human beings as well. And they have just as much right as my grandfather had to leave the country we were manipulating to come here and do work, because that's what we're asking them to do. Just because we ignore the fact that they didn't do it on their own, there's a system in place, doesn't make us good people. Let's stop ignoring that. Let's pass meaningful immigration reform that's going to allow workers to be here legally when they are coming from those other countries. Better yet, let's not allow those countries to be manipulated by us. We don't need to be that kind of empire. We need to stop.
Thank you. The other man. Well, don't get comfortable, anybody.
I went from number 1 to other.
No, we're still balanced. Just the other.
What is your position
This is a question that my mother always asked me. Tell me, Matt, that if you're lucky enough to go to Congress, make sure you're not going to screw it up, and make sure that you're going to make sure that the promises that have been made to myself and all people of my generation are lived up to. And the answer is, of course, Mom. And that's right now what we're thinking about. How do you go ahead and preserve the system? And it's quite simple. We're going to live up to the promises. There's no doubt about it. And as you go forward, you know what? Maybe there needs to be a system for someone who's Elise's age or younger. Maybe there does. But for right now, I can pledge to everyone in this room that I will never vote for any type of Social Security that will ever impact anyone's benefits, anyone's rights, and anyone's responsibilities. Why? Because you lived up to the deal. It's very simple. Any deal I've ever done, you got to live up to. You paid in, you did your service, you did proper things. The federal government has to do the same thing and live up to its end of the bargain. How much I pledge to everyone, all the people in the 21st Congressional District, and yes, and my mom as well. Thank you.
Be careful.
Many of you may know the truth about Social Security, which is that if we were to take the wage cap and we were to basically ask for a very small amount of money by changing the cap from, I think it's $100,000 and change to $250,000, we would end up securing Social Security for somewhere between 75 and 80 more years without the constant threat of privatization. And that's really the threat we all have to watch at the congressional level. Privatization saves us all lots of money because we all believe in capitalism. I'm a capitalist. I run a business, a real business that actually produces things. It's not a fake business. It's not shuffling money around. It's getting up in the morning, it's going to work, it's making something with your hands, it's then selling and marketing that product. It's employing people, it's managing. When I'm done at the end of the day, I'm very tired, and I want to make sure that on payday, the money that I'm putting into a Social Security account, many years down the road when I'm so broken and my back doesn't work anymore that I need to stay at home and watch Oprah all day or reruns of it because it's not on anymore. I don't have a TV, I'm teasing. At that point in time, I would like to believe that my very minuscule amount of Social Security will be available to me so I can eat ramen noodles, and pay my utility bill, which by then will be $8,000 a month. Social Security is something that if we really want to save it, we don't want to privatize it. We want to, just like Medicare, make absolutely certain that those of us who've already invested in it all our lives aren't robbed of it. I know that my parents, when you look at Medicare, are being robbed of what they pay. And I can only imagine what's in store for them later on down the road. Which is why we need to stop having all these different systems. Social Security is just one system. I think it should be expanded so that we aren't doing IRAs and mutual funds to fund our retirement. Social Security is actually enough money to live on when you are retired, on a fixed income. Right now people can't afford to live on it. And that's, again, how is that a retirement system? The answer is it's not. So I actually think we should expand Social Security, protect it, and I think we also should never allow it to be privatized, because privatized means fake business. It means we're going to subsidize it. It means we're going to allow someone to call themselves a business owner or a businessman when they take public money and they don't give it back. That's all they're talking about. It's a little shuffle of the cards with Social Security. We can't let that happen.
Thank you.
Social Security is a promise, and our government has failed to keep that promise for future generations. I'm going to be a committed voice to protecting and preserving Social Security for those of you that have paid into this system. We all work very hard to pay into Social Security on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. It's very important. The federal government cannot let us down on ensuring that those that are retired now or that are near retirement, so everyone in this room is able to earn what they've paid into the system, because those are your hard-earned dollars. However, this is a generational issue. The government has let down my generation on this promise. Unless we focus on modernizing Social Security for my generation, The reality is, it will not be there for me despite the fact that we are paying into the system. So I hope to protect and preserve Social Security for all of our retirees and for all of those who have paid into the system. But for those of us like me who are inheriting a broken system, we need to talk about modernizing it. I have a pretty long, knock on wood, a pretty long life and work span ahead of me. I would be willing to raise the retirement age for people in my age group who have longer life expectations, and we can remodel the system to fit reality today. But it's a promise, and it's a promise that I intend to keep if I'm elected.
Thank you. You again. Just lost it.
You're looking for the toughest one.
I am. No.
What the heck?
What is your position regarding legalizing marijuana?
Oh, that's a good one for me. Unlike Bill Clinton, I have smoked marijuana and I did inhale it. And the reason I did that is so have 78% of Americans. And anyone who's not admitting that to themselves, really regardless of age, is lying. It's time to stop lying. Marijuana is not anything more than a drug. And I mean that. There are those who are going to call it a plant. I'm going to use a mainstream term. I'm going to say, okay, it's a drug. Okay, it's a drug, but alcohol is a drug and it's legal. And tobacco is a drug and it's legal. And caffeine is a drug and it's legal. How come marijuana is illegal? And the answer is because it's not a drug. It's a really dangerous economic motivator, and it is an herbal medicine, and it works for a lot of things that we are disregarding. We're not reading the science of it. We're listening to the hysteria. I'm not advocating everybody go out and get stoned all the time at all. You know, I'm a Roman. I believe in everything in moderation. I really do. And I think that if you're addicted to something, that's always bad. What I believe is that when you look at the criminalizing of a plant that was used as a medicine into the 40s by a very narrow cabal of bankers and robber barons in this country, it was to outlaw hemp. And my belief, from what I've read about marijuana illegalization, is that that really boils down to they were already foreseeing what plastics would be. When they were looking at hemp fiber and carbon fiber made from hemp, they were looking at its uses for textile, for building purposes, for clothing, for food, for fuel. I mean, the stuff is amazing. And it has like 1/990th of the THC that marijuana does. So it's not something you get high from unless you smoke a garbage bag full of it. And I don't think you should. So why is it illegal? It's illegal because every small farmer in the country could grow it. And many other countries allow that to occur. And we even have some states where, again, common sense is regrowing in the collective brain. And we're saying, let's not let the federal government do this to us anymore. We have a factory prison system. Again, economic development based on putting people in jail who are drug users. That's crazy. And it's not just crazy on a human level, it's crazy on an economic level. 65 grand per person for 70% of the prison population in the United States who are in there for non-vital reasons? Is that really how we want to spend our money? Well, you know, we build a lot of prisons that way, and it's good for the district, and we got a bunch of corrections officers working union jobs. Well, that's good, but why don't they go build the solar roadway? Again, let's be imaginative. There are other things we could do with that money, and illegalizing, criminalizing marijuana should not be one of them. Hemp, much more importantly.
Thank you.
I don't support the legalization of marijuana. Marijuana is a drug, and I believe it's a gateway drug. And we're seeing what the effects are of the legalization of marijuana in Colorado, which passed legalization legislation to help drive up economic growth. We're seeing challenges from law enforcement officials who find that there is an increase in traffic violations and erratic driving. We're seeing health challenges stemming from marijuana use in Colorado. We're seeing educational effects. Students aren't focusing on what they're learning in their classrooms. So So I don't support legalizing marijuana. And I also was very disappointed that at the beginning of this year, Governor Cuomo talked about the legalization of marijuana as an economic growth potential for New York State. This is not how we need to be growing our economy. Casinos and legalizing marijuana are not the answer in New York. The way we're going to grow the economy and create jobs is lowering our taxes, making us competitive with other states around the country, fracking in New York State. But I was very disappointed in this governor's focus on legalizing marijuana and not focusing on why we really are friendly as a business in New York State.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we're ready for it, but I think the issue today comes in terms of medical marijuana, and I think that's an issue that's a little bit different. And I think, well, what if my wife or my mom had a disease or ailment that really could actually, in a compassionate way, lessen the daily grind of the treatment. And I do think at the end of the day, I would shake out in favor of that. I think it's a compassionate question. I think it's a question that highly regulated and under the care of a doctor or a licensed medical professional. I think that's something important. And I think as a conservative and someone who understands the power of medicine and to go forward, I do think that the compassionate thing, the common sense thing, is on a highly prescribed, overseen basis when it comes to that type of treatment. That we don't want to have these bromides in holes constructed around a building that doesn't allow treatment to actually go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Elise will be up first. The question: do you think that members of Congress should be on the Affordable Care Act and under the Social Security system?
Absolutely. This is why the first piece of legislation I want to propose is that members of Congress have to live by their own laws. The Affordable Care Act is just one example of how members of Congress are applying a separate set of rules. The fact that they receive subsidies for their health care and don't feel the full implementation of Obamacare, that's shameful. The list goes on, the fact that they have retirement funds, lifetime health care. We don't have this in our hardworking families. So I want to require members of Congress to live by the laws they pass. I will introduce legislation to make that law in this country, and I think it's an issue where I can work with both Republicans and Democrats to get it passed.
Thank you. Matt?
Of course I do. This is the joke in Washington. It's become where Congress passes law and accepts themselves. I mean, whether it's Obamacare or other laws, regulations, it's an absolute joke. Think about it. We need to change the roster. If you have a baseball team which plays 162 games a year, and you go 20 and 142, you're going to fire everybody on the field and the manager. Right now, as far as I'm concerned, Congress is lucky if they win 20 out of 162 games. You have to change the roster. You have to change the type of people you send. Having more career folks go down there, continuing to elect the same people who continue to spend our money, tax into oblivion, and do things where, oh, by the way, it's good for everybody in this room, but it's bad for me. You have to change the entire roster. It doesn't matter if it's Democrat, Republican, or a few independents that are there. We have to change the roster. I'm running for Congress to make sure that you have a common sense, business-focused alternative to the same thing that we continue to send to Washington. Again, how can you carve yourself out from Obamacare? It's unconscionable, and anyone who was part of that process should be sent home immediately.
Thank you.
Here is something I fervently disagree with most Republicans about, but I would say that it's really important to understand where I'm going to digress to right now. I'm against the ACA for a couple of reasons, but the primary one is it's a brutal and criminal behavior being perpetrated against the class I and most of us belong to. You are saying that hospital. I built the public university you're doing the research in. I'm subsidizing the pharmaceuticals that are going overseas and the ones we are doing here. And when the CEO at the HMO, decides that he wants to go and have a party for his wife that costs $25 million and he tanks the whole company, you're going to bail him out again with my money. And their answer to that is I've got to buy health insurance. I can't afford it today. I was up to a point 3 years ago where I was paying almost $10,000 a year for my son and I. That's it. For Blue Shield. Great coverage. I still had $50 copays at the doctors and we never went. So what was I staving off? Same is true for my workers. When the coverage I was offering them, which I was paying 50% of, was through the Chamber of Commerce, was no longer discounted enough that we could afford to participate. Because I make the same amount of money as the people who work at my bakery, I don't pay myself more. I make $18.50 an hour. What I did instead was I said, we're all going to suffer together. I'm sorry, that's the best answer I've got. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that several years later what they would do is say, oh, no, you gotta buy it now. And we got you 52 cents too. Ha ha. I mean, it's not an answer. It's disgusting, and it was written by the health insurance lobbies. It really was. So I'm so much more against it than Republicans are. I can't even begin to express it to you. But the answer is not to go back to the country doctor, because it doesn't fix the problem. You still have the economic development monkey sitting on your back. The hospital is still going to be right there. It's still going to be an economic development engine. It's still going to be sucking in all kinds of public money all the time. And it's not necessary because there's one 6 miles away doing the same thing. And all I can say is single-payer healthcare. Half the price of what we already spend, covered by the public money we're already spending. Better result. Canadians live 3 years longer than we do. Their obesity rate is 25%. Their infant mortality